Hello, everyone, and welcome back into another edition of Inquirer Live at Game Day Central. Today, we are in Cleveland, coming to you live from the press box at First Energy Stadium, where in about 90 minutes, the Eagles will face, rather, the Cleveland Browns. This is the team's second preseason game. I am Eagles beat reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Josh Tolentino. And as always, I am joined by my fellow beat reporter and co host, EJ Smith. EJ, I think this is day 5 or 6 in Cleveland. How are you doing, man?
I've lost count for first and foremost, and I feel like they're indoctrinating us. Like you've got the Cleveland Browns orange behind you. I've got it
Yeah,
right here. They really want us to look like we're sort of fraternizing with the enemy here, right?
yeah. As EJ pointed out, we are coming to you live from the press box again at First Energy Stadium. In just a little bit, the Eagles are going to be facing the Cleveland Browns in their second preseason game. As a reminder to everyone viewing from back home, throughout the entire season, preseason, regular season, postseason. We'll be coming to you live before every single game to tell you what you need to know about the Eagles. EJ, where can they find us?
Yeah, that's right, Josh. They can find us at inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. It's where we'd like to hear from you guys. Josh and I, we spend time on that link, and we kind of give you our instant analysis throughout the game, and we can interact with you. If you've got questions or you've got things that you sort of notice on the broadcast, we can kind of chop it up over there. So make sure to head over there, during the show and even after the show during the game.
No doubt. And as a reminder, again, if you're viewing on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. If you submit your questions, comments throughout the show, we'll have a chance to read them later on in a segment that EJ pointed out called What You Said. EJ, let's get into it. It was a jam-packed week as we were here in Cleveland for the joint practices between the Eagles and Browns. Let's first touch base, EJ, on what's the latest with Jalen Hurts. The first practice, the second practice, what we saw from him. I guess what stood out to you the most in regards to the Eagles starting quarterback and how he performed?
Yeah, well, I would just say that. Well, first off, let me say that I watched the defense a lot. But in the times I did watch Jalen Hurts, I think that the offense had a good showing in the last two practices. I think it kind of bleeds into what I said, or no, what I thought last week after the Jets game. I think it honestly reflects well on the Eagles' defense how the Eagles' offense looks when it plays against other defenses. I do think that they looked relatively sharp, especially on the second day. And I think that it's becoming more and more apparent. Like AJ Brown is as advertised. He made a lot of really nice plays over the last 2 days, and you really can't understate like how much. You really can't overstate, excuse me, how much of an influence he's going to have on this offense. I mean, he can prop up an offense for stretches in a game just because he's so dynamic. He's almost unguardable sometimes, and you saw that in Cleveland for sure.
Yeah, he had that my ball Randy Moss type moment when it occurred during one-on-ones in the end zone. I think the play started or the snap started from about the 10-yard line, and Jalen Hurts just tossed him a soft floater in the left corner of the end zone. And honestly, the Browns cornerback that was on him, Greedy Williams, a few years ago was at LSU, played a lot against Devontae Smith in college. But Greedy Williams had some pretty tight coverage on AJ. You could not ask for much better. Hand in his face, their bodies were right up against each other, and Jalen Hurts, he just tosses AJ that floater, and this is what AJ Brown does. We've seen it all of camp since he's gotten here. We've seen it previously during his run down there in Tennessee with the Titans. He just went up, leaped, and it was just so impressive. I mean, even on the way home yesterday, myself, EJ, and our colleague Jeff McClain were talking about that specific play. He just jumped, and Greedy was in front of him, and he put his hands around his helmet to grab the ball. I believe the Eagles social team put out a video of that.
Yeah, you got to share that
play.
one, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And again, just one of the many impressive. I mean, it just feels like every day that we watch AJ Brown, there's almost a moment like that. But I guess it's worth noting, EJ, there also wasn't, and AJ Brown actually pointed this out himself. The Browns did not have Denzel Ward, one of the league's best corners, throughout joint practices. He was working out individually, but he did not work out in those team settings. And also their top slot corner, Greg Newsome, was held out. So, regardless, again, I pointed out Greedy Williams had great coverage on AJ Brown. You know, one of the most impressive plays again that I've seen throughout training camp. EJ, you said you watched the defense. What stood out to you? I believe you wrote about Josh Sweat the other day and his performance in practice.
Yeah, so the first day, the Eagles starting defense seemed a little bit. It seemed like there was a transition. They had to get used to a different offense, and the Browns' offense is a lot different than the Eagles in the sense that they do a lot of under center runs. They do a lot of play action, and their play action game looks a lot like their run game. And they got a couple chunk plays on the first day as a result of kind of like taking advantage of that play action. But by the second day, I mean, the Eagles defense had a really, really nice day. And like you said, Josh, I wrote about Josh Sweat, but really the Eagles overhang players in general. Their edge rushers, defensive ends and edge rushers, outside linebackers, all those guys. They had a really good day. They were really disruptive. Josh Sweat had like 3 sacks and 2 tackles for losses. Patrick Johnson had a good day. Taron Jackson has looked really good all camp, and he continued to look good during practices. And Hassan Reddick, I think, is a guy who I was sure it's still one of those things where it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, is Hassan Reddick having a quiet camp or is Lane Johnson having an awesome camp? And I think it's evident that it was the latter. I think that Hassan Reddick is doing okay now that he's not matched up against one of the best right tackles in football. The Browns' defense, their offensive front is pretty good too. So yeah, I would say that the Eagles' offense or defensive front has definitely look good for that second day.
Let's keep it on the trenches, EJ. On the other side of the ball, we saw some intense battles, especially on that last day of practice. I was right there, just a few feet away from the action at the practice field out in Berea, Ohio. Jordan Mailata, Miles Garrett. It was, they only had a few reps against each other in that one-on-one setting, but man, that was I'm sure many fans would pay tickets to watch that battle. Unfortunately, obviously, with the rain, the expectations for starters, we might not see that in today's game. But honing in on it and what we saw in practice, EJ, man, that was a fun battle between Jordan and Miles. And not only that, afterwards, we got to speak with Jordan Mailata, and he told us how much of a learning experience it was for him. And we've got to remember, anytime we talk about Jordan Mailata, this is a guy who only started playing football just several years ago when the Eagles took him and on a seventh round flyer pick on day 3 of that draft. Former rugby player. His ascension again has been quite remarkable. EJ, what have you noticed out of Jordan Mailata over these past few days and really all throughout this summer as he continues to cement his spot over there on the left side?
So I'm not really big on like hot takes or anything like that, but I do. I really believe that he could be an All-Pro left tackle this year. He was hard on himself. He said that he went 1 for 1 against Garrett. I had him at 2-0. I really do think that first rep he recovered nicely. I think I think he's his own worst critic in that sense,
Hmm.
but I really do. I mean, he's had a really good camp. Oh, we got Les Bowen, Inquirer alumni,
How's it
sneaking in
going,
behind me.
Les?
Yeah. Um, but no, I think that Mailata's looked really, really, really good this camp. Lane Johnson again is having an awesome camp. I think the Eagles' offensive front in general has looked really good for most of camp. One-on-one pass rush drills are supposed to heavily favor defensive linemen, and sometimes you can kind of forget that when you're watching the Eagles' offensive front. And Jordan Mailata is a big part of that.
Yeah, and again, just honing in on those specific reps that Jordan Mailata had against Miles Garrett. It was a show, EJ. You just had to be there for all these fans. Expectations for Jordan Mailata and really the whole team have risen throughout this summer, throughout the offseason. But he certainly held his own against one of the best pass rushers, one of the best edge rushers in the NFL, and Miles Garrett. And you know what? They had a laugh about it afterwards. They were shaking each other up. They had an exchange of words, a lengthy exchange of words after practice, and both of them trying to better one another. EJ, let's keep it here on who's hurt, who's healthy for this team, because it's pretty essential going into preseason week 2. As a reminder to everyone, after every game, the team is required to cut additional players as they work towards that 53-man roster at the end of August. EJ, I'm going to run through the really the main injuries here, and I'll break them down by section, just in regards to expectations or time frames of when these players are expected to return. I think the headliners here are running back Miles Sanders, who has been working through a hamstring injury, and cornerback James Bradbury. Last week he suffered a groin injury in practice. EJ, I bracket these two players together, Miles Sanders and James Bradbury, because our understanding of the situation is that although they didn't practice all week, is that the hope or the expectation is that they will be able to return for week one. EJ, if they are able to, what is the significance in that? Obviously, that's their CB2 and James Bradbury and their top running back with Miles Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, oops, excuse me. Whoa. Yeah, I think that the indication is that they'll both be ready before week one. The Eagles are overly cautious with guys this time of year. So yeah, I mean, it's not overly concerning at this point with Miles Sanders. Like, I mean, obviously, it's not ideal that he's already dealing with soft tissue injuries, but I really don't think that the preseason's very valuable for running backs. I feel like they're the kind of guys who you just get them the ball week one and they're ready to go. So I think that they're just holding him out precautiously, and I don't think that that time is all that costly. With Bradbury, I mean, he was having a great camp, and he kind of shows like he's a pro. Is it probably would it be beneficial for him to be out there getting reps in this defensive scheme? For sure, I think that the time might cost him a little bit, but I don't foresee them going, oh well, James Bradbury missed a week of camp, so therefore he's not really where he's supposed to be. He kind of knows what he's supposed to do. He's very comfortable in zone coverage, so yeah, I mean, I don't think that. What are we, like a month away? Or I guess no, we're getting like what, like 2 weeks away from the season opener, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Well, I think if we're still here in 2 weeks, then we could probably have a conversation about it. But I think that those guys are more day to day than week to week at this point.
Yeah, really. And as you pointed out with James Bradbury, after he signed with the Eagles, we saw his impact right away. We saw how the physicality that he brings to the line of scrimmage, how he's able to jam receivers. And like what you mentioned, an excellent corner and zone coverage. Nick Sirianni yesterday, this question was particular to Devontae Smith and the expectations to see him in a preseason game this year. Again, as a reminder, during his rookie season, he also dealt with a minor injury throughout training camp. Didn't see much preseason action. Guys like Devontae Smith, guys like James Bradbury, even Miles. Nick Sirianni said yesterday, these are his words. They played a lot of football. Obviously they got what they wanted out of them during the joint practices. But a guy like James Bradbury, you can just trot him out there week one, and he knows the assignment. He knows his responsibilities. So moving into the next category, EJ, these are players that we know we're not going to see until week one. Javon Hargrave and Jason Kelsey. Just quickly wrapping here, EJ. What are your thoughts on again Hargrave and Kelsey not participating in training camp? It's almost the same thing that could be said with both of them, especially again starting center, not just starting center, but he's played the most consecutive games among all NFL centers. I think it's 122 games with Jason Kelsey.
Yeah, Kelsey, I wouldn't worry about him missing
Yeah.
time. I think he's at the point in his career where those preseason games weren't going to mean anything to him anyway. Hargrave's a little bit of a different test case. I think it's tough for some of those bigger guys, interior defensive linemen to sort of hit the ground running without camp. Whether it's conditioning or I just remember like Fletcher Cox did missed an entire training camp and like had a slow start and he kind of said like I just needed time like. I think it is sometimes with guys like that. It's hard if it's like you haven't been playing football for 2 or 3 weeks to drop into week one and that's sort of your preseason. But I mean, at the same time, Hargrave had a really, really good year last year. I think that he's an ascending player, and I don't know. I don't necessarily think that it's going to cost him too much. But I would say that Kelsey, like you said, is kind of like a tier above as far as like worry meter. Like I'm not worried at all about him not playing in the preseason.
Yeah, Jason Kelsey has played a lot of football, and another encouraging sign, I guess, in his return or rehab from that elbow surgery rather, is that he was on the field yesterday with cleats. So, or not yesterday. Yesterday was the off day, but 2 days ago during the last joint practice, he was out there working out individually, doing some cardio drills and workouts. So again, his action hasn't been totally limited. We have seen him out there on the field. Last bracket, EJ, of injuries. Tight end Grant Calcaterra, the rookie out of SMU. and wide receiver Greg Ward. Greg Ward has had a toe injury. Calcaterra has had a hamstring injury. Both of them, to my recollection, they practiced the first day. It might have been the first 2 days, and then they've been held out really all of training camp. The encouraging sign for the Eagles is that Grant Calcaterra returned to practice here this past Friday. What's your take on both of them, EJ? Well, Greg Ward's liked a lot throughout the building, but missing that amount of time is pretty significant in camp for a guy that you might consider that's on the bubble of making this team. Same thing can be said about Grant Calcaterra. I know he was taken with a later pick, but for those later picks, your roster spot might not be as secure, especially with an injury like that. It was an encouraging sign to see him get back on the field on Friday, although there was another injury scare with
Yeah,
Grant.
I was about to say, let's start with Calcaterra. I feel like he was desperate, like to just you know take a risk all over again. Like he just got back on the field, and like within 15 minutes of his first practice back, he's sliding feet first into a fence. Like, I had a pretty good vantage point of it. So he makes the catch in the corner of the end zone, and like it was a really great catch, like a leaping catch. But his momentum carried him all the way off the grass onto the asphalt, and he, like if you've
And he
ever
slipped. He like slipped like
yeah,
he was on banana peels.
if
Yeah,
you've ever been on asphalt with cleats, it's not really a great traction situation. So yeah, he slides like feet first into the fence. Luckily, he was okay. I don't know if the camera stand that he ran into on his way to the fence it was
made it
okay.
out. Yep.
But yeah, I just kept thinking like, man, you just got back to practicing, you're already doing this. But yeah, I agree. I think that Calcaterra's got a battle for roster spot. He showed some good things before he got hurt, and he's going to have to kind of continue that because that tight end two, tight end three role is still kind of up for grabs. With Greg Ward, you're right. Like he's a culture guy. He's been here for a long time. He's well liked in the locker room, but at the same time, he's missed a significant amount of playing time here. And I do think that the 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 wide receiver spots are really tight. So I do think that it's a little bit of it's something to keep an eye on for sure. I don't know if he's going to be somebody who maybe ends up on IR if if this injury is serious, but if he's not back soon, I do kind of think that he's kind of in jeopardy here.
EJ with some great analysis on the injury report for the team heading into preseason week 2. EJ, let's transition into our favorite segment. It is called What You Said. As a reminder to everyone back home, you can submit your questions and comments all throughout the week at inquire.com/Eagles Game Day, and we will read them right here on the show before the game. Our first question, and this is a great one, EJ. I know you'll be very passionate about this one. It comes from Sports U of U, who asks, "How has Britton Covey been at practice? Uh, what are his chances at making the roster?" For everyone back home, you should head over to inquire.com because EJ wrote a terrific profile on Britton Covey. He talked to, again, many people who've been involved in Covey's life throughout his upbringing. And you can find that story at inquire.com. So I'm going to leave this question all up to EJ. How's Britton Covey looked?
Thank you, because it's like called the shameless plug, and when you do it for me, it doesn't feel as shameless. Yeah, he's got a great story though. That'll be the only thing I say if you want to check it out. But yeah, he's looked pretty good. I think he kind of has slowed down a little bit from the beginning of camp when he was kind of the leading candidate for that training camp darling role. I still think he has a chance to secure that. I think even he said to me during this in the story, like he knows that he's going to have to make this team as a returner before he makes it as a slot receiver. So I think these next 2 games are huge for him. Is he going to be able to make a play in the return game to kind of show that he should be the return man? But he has looked good in camp. I mean, he's been working in with the first team at times, second team a lot of the time. We mentioned Greg Ward's out, so he gets a lot of second team snaps, and I think you'll see a good amount of him in the next 2 weeks. um, you know, Mentioning like how much has he been able to do? He thought he had torn ligaments in his thumb, but it turned out to be a sprain. And he was limited for I think a day or two after that injury was announced, but he seems like a full participant now. And he doesn't seem all that hindered by the thumb. I imagine it bothers him. I imagine it's a little bit uncomfortable to catch punts and rifled passes with a sprained thumb, but he's not limited in the sense of he's doing everything in practice. So.
Yeah, and I will add a thought on Covey, the undrafted receiver from Utah, the speedster from Utah. On day one of the joint practices, he didn't do much, in my opinion, to stand out in regards to those one-on-one routes. But yesterday, EJ, or I'm sorry, 2 days ago during the last joint practice, man, he put this. I can't recall which Browns defender it was, but he put him on skates with a nice and just really sleek double move. Again, it occurred during the red zone, a little bit further, so there was some more space to work with. I think the play occurred, or the snap occurred from the 20-yard line, so there was more space to maneuver around the field a little bit compared to being right up on the end zone. But Britton Covey, he put on a double move, and he was wide open in that back corner of the end zone. Unfortunately for him, the throw from Gardner Minshew was just a little bit overthrown. But again, Britton Covey has been technically sound. I know Nick Sirianni, the Eagles coach, is a big fan of guys who are technically sound with the
Yeah.
fundamentals. So, again, Inquirer.com is where you can read EJ's story on Britton Covey to learn more about his journey to the NFL. EJ, moving on to our next question, it comes from Joe's Lewis. He asks, and really, if you go to Twitter, EJ Smith 94 or JCT Sports, you'll see photos of this very question. But thoughts on Kareem Hunt to Philadelphia? He is obviously referring to the Browns running back Kareem Hunt, who is unhappy with his contract situation right now. EJ, you and I both took photos of this interaction, but Kareem Hunt, or I think it was Nick Sirianni who approached him to introduce himself before the start of practice the other day. EJ, how do you want to handle this question? Obviously, Miles Sanders has been out. Behind him on the running back depth chart is Kenny Gainwell, the second-year running back out of Memphis. Boston Scott, who was actually the first player here on the field warming up today, and then Jason Huntley and Kennedy Brooks. Could they use a guy like Kareem Hunt? EJ, what's your temperature on this take from fans?
Yeah, well, first, the picture was appropriately timed. I don't know if Kareem Hunt did that strategically. He waits until every reporter's walking past Nick Sirianni to go up and go, "Hey, how's it going?" But yeah, I mean, listen, most teams could use somebody like Kareem Hunt. He's a really good running back, especially in the pass game. And the Eagles don't have great running back depth. I think what it's going to come down to, as it always does, is price. I don't think the Eagles are in a position to pay a high premium for a running back right now. I think, obviously the team's a lot better than it was last year. The roster's kind of getting to a point where you could call it loaded, but I still think they're kind of a year or two away from making a win now move like that. If it's a good price and you are comfortable paying him, then I mean I could see it happening. But I really do think that it comes down to price. I've seen people float like Andre Dillard for Kareem Hunt. I don't know if I like the Eagles' tackle depth enough to just part with a guy like Andre Dillard for a running back who's going to split time with Miles Sanders. So I really do think it comes down to what's it going to cost to get him. If it's not crazy expensive, sure they could use a player like that. But if it's going to cost them something like Andre Dillard or somebody, a premium asset like that, I don't know if I would be as bullish about that.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking a position like running back, we have to remember, and Jalen Hurts played a big role in this, but this was a team last year. They led the league in NFL rushing, so something is working there, led by especially that stout, play on words, offensive line play. EJ, I'm going to handle this quick question that comes here through the chat. From our producer Angelica, the question comes from Ed Rogers. Who are the Eagles' backup quarterbacks? I think he's referring to, if in the case that we don't see Jalen Hurts today. Obviously, Gardner Minshew is going to handle a bulk of those first starter reps, I guess you say, behind Jalen Hurts. Then you've got Reed Sinnett and Carson Strong, who we haven't seen much of throughout training camp. So those are three guys to pay attention to today in preseason week 2. A couple more reader questions here, EJ. Comes from Tony House. She asks, any lingering effects of injury to Landon Dickerson? EJ, Landon's a guy who I feel like can play through anything. I mean, offensive line guys are really kind of built like that in that sense. But him especially, we saw him rehab and return last year pretty quickly from that knee injury that he had in college. Even throughout the year, he was dinged up. Had some things that he was battling through that carried over even into the summer. You really can't tell when he's 100% healthy because he just always goes out there and gives it his all.
Yeah, I mean, with Landon, I mean, if there's any lingering effects with that injury, it didn't show up in joint practices. I mean, we talked about AJ Brown and like that wow play that he had. Landon
Hmm.
Dickerson had a wow play as well where he completely decleated this guy, Jacob
Yeah.
Phillips,
Hmm.
the Browns linebacker. It was just one of those things where he's kind of pulling, and they talked about it afterward, how he's pulling and he's kind of staying low, so that Jacob Phillips didn't necessarily see him, and then all of a sudden you've got like this 340-pound guard just like completely running into you and knocking you over, and then he had a little dance afterward. I guess you could call it a dance. So no, I don't think Landon Dickerson's dealing with anything all that significant based off of his play the last 2 days. or the last 3 days, I guess you would call it. Um, so yeah, I don't think it's anything lingering.
No, certainly. And our colleague Jeff McLean wrote about that play specifically in his practice observations when Lander Dickerson laid out that big block and then celebrated with that dance. Our last question, EJ, comes from Anthony. There's a lot of numbers here: 64, 33, 24, 95. I got your entire username there, Anthony. He asked, who finishes with more catches this season, Zach Pascal or Quez Watkins? This is a pretty good question, EJ, considering that a majority of the targets, again, are going to go to the top three guys: A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and tight end Dallas Goddard. I'll let you answer this one, and then I'll go ahead and provide my opinion based on what you say, man.
So I am probably higher on Zach Pascal than most. I think he's going to have a real role in this offense, especially
Hmm.
because of what he can bring in the run game and in the red zone. I still think it's probably Quez Watkins. I think that Quez Watkins has just a higher ceiling in this offense. I think he is kind of the established third wide receiver, whereas Zach Pascal is probably going to be like an early down guy, somebody you see on a lot of run plays, short yardage situations. I mean, Quez, he's just like electric. And I think, this move where he's going to play more in the slot even than he did last year, I think that's going to be really good for him. So I would go Quez, but I do think that Pascal might make this even more interesting than I think some fans might expect.
Hmm. EJ, if this were receiving yards, I think I'm going to give it to Quez Watkins. He has that deep threat ability, that really home run speed threat that
For
again
sure.
is one pass, and Quez is going to have 60, 80 yards there on one play. In terms of more catches, I'm kind of indifferent. Maybe Zach Pascal, because he'll get those red zone targets possibly from the slot. He's a big body receiver. Right now, I'm going to lean Pascal if you're going Watkins. But
I like it.
this was, yeah, I like it too. This was a great segment of what you said. A reminder to everyone: you can submit your questions and comments at inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. Just like right now, next week, we'll be in Miami next week, EJ.
A lot
I'm sure
warmer.
you're looking. Yeah, we're both looking forward to that. But down in Miami, we'll have a chance to read your comments on Game Day Central. EJ, we've got a couple more sections here before we wrap up. Let's go to tweet of the week, and I'll actually read through this because shameless plug, as you said. All right, basically, this was breaking down an interaction between Devontae Smith and Browns defensive back Richard LeCount. um, LeCount was basically talking trash to the Eagles sideline, and Devontae he was pretty quiet, and then he actually singled out Devontae Smith as he was walking down the field. um, Devontae said that the last time he saw LeCount, he put him on the bench in reference to their Alabama Georgia days, and not just that, EJ. Right after that, Nick Sirianni even butted in, and he was trying to diffuse the situation in a playful way. He reminded Devontae that the last time he saw LeCount, he won the Heisman in reference to Devontae Smith's Heisman Trophy award. EJ, this was a pretty playful banter between the Eagles and Browns. There weren't many major fights that we saw throughout the week, but this was certainly one to remember. Again, with one of the top Eagles players in Devontae Smith.
Yeah, and first off, let me say that like putting a guy into the bench in an high school all star game is kind of just like a jerk move more than like something to write home about.
Yeah,
You know,
and I mean that's DPI holding, whatever you want to call it. In today's game in the NFL.
Yeah. But no, I mean, listen, Devontae kind of backed up all that talk. You kind of saw, I would say, like a different side of him after that. He's obviously a competitor, but I think the trash talk kind of ratcheted it up for him a little bit. And shortly thereafter, he had like three straight catches in team. And he's had a really good stretch of practices in Cleveland. I mean, he's definitely been on one of the bright spots. I think that we kind of talked about Hassan Reddick and Lane Johnson earlier. I think he's probably a little relieved to go against guys not named James Bradbury and Darius Slay, especially Bradbury. I think that Bradbury is a tough matchup for Devontae, and he looks a lot better now in Cleveland. And I think it kind of answers that question. Like, was he having a quiet camp? No, he's just going against really good competition.
Yeah, and again, Nick Sirianni mentioned it yesterday. Devontae's played a lot of football in reference, to his past career at Alabama. He's a guy that, again, I wouldn't expect to see today on the field, given the importance he has to this team. EJ, prediction time. I'm not going to ask you for a prediction on the score. It's preseason, but who's maybe one or two guys that we should look out for today as the Eagles face the Browns?
Yeah, well, I guess shameless plug again. Britton Covey's definitely a guy that I'm going to keep a close eye on for the next 2 weeks to see what he does in the return game. Yeah, give me Taron Jackson. We talked about him earlier too. He's having a really good camp, and he's one of those guys. I wrote about this. Like, he had Taron Jackson, Marlon Toipulo too, and Patrick Johnson, all sixth or seventh round picks in 2021, and all look like they can play. They all look like guys who could be a part of a defensive line rotation and be productive members of it. That's pretty rare to get three guys late in the draft who can all contribute to winning as pass rushers. So I'm going to be watching all three of those guys, but give me Taron Jackson specifically today because he's looked really good. I mean, he was a productive guy in college, and the level of competition was the big question. Was he going to be able to make that jump from Coastal Carolina to here? But I mean, man, he has made some legitimate strides. So I definitely would keep an eye on him too.
All right, I'm going to go with the Georgia duo, N'Kobe Dean and Jordan Davis. We haven't seen many starters here warming up for the Eagles, but Jordan Davis has been one of them. If Nick Sirianni, it really seems like all throughout the NFL, keeps up with this trend of getting some rookies, especially the top rookies, sometime during these preseason games. Uh, is he a starter? We've seen him line up again, in different formations alongside Fletcher Cox. I'm looking forward to seeing those two. Besides that, maybe a guy like Reed Blankenship, the undrafted safety out of Middle Tennessee. He's flashed a bit during camp. Last week against the Jets, he had a team high or game high in tackles, 7 tackles. But those are some good names that you pointed out. Britton Covey, especially. Check out that story at Inquirer.com. EJ, any other predictions for this day for this game? I'm just predicting.
It's going to be ugly.
Yeah, I mean the rain has subsided here in Cleveland, but I'm hoping for that everything goes on time in regards to pace of play.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah.
All right, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this edition of Inquire Live at Game Day Central. Be sure to stick around on inquire.com/Eagles Game Day to follow along with all of us. We'll be live tweeting throughout the season, throughout the game, and we'll obviously be posting our coverage there. Again, myself, EJ Smith, and Jeff McClain are here in Cleveland. Be sure to check out all of our coverage there at inquire.com/Eagles Game Day. For EJ Smith, I am Josh Tolentino. Thank you so much for tuning in to Game Day Central. We will join you on Saturday evening. That is our next show. EJ, where are we going to be?
We're going to be in Miami, Josh. I mean, man, what a change.
Yeah, what a change. We're going to be flying back to Philadelphia tomorrow, just being at home.
Got to get haircuts.
Yeah, well, shameless plug for our barbers. Just a quick haircut, quick day back in Philly. And then we are headed to Miami, where some more intense joint practices between the Eagles and Dolphins are in store. Jalen Hurts gets to visit his old friend Tua Tagovailoa down there, the Dolphins quarterback. It'll be their first time seeing each other in the NFL. Again, for EJ Smith, I am Josh Tolentino. Thank you so much for tuning in to Inquire Live at Game Day Central.